All right, we have got a lot to talk about. Don Granato is fired, and Kevyn Adams just fired everybody up with the best press conference he's ever had. I'm strangely fired up. Let's talk about it. Coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We got a ton to talk about here on today's show. If you would like to reach out, get a comment of your own through, be sure to check out our text line. You could do that by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedonsabres to sign up, and then just shoot me a text on your phone. It's like a normal text group chat. You only have to sign up online the one time, and then everything else is via your phone. We did get the news alert out to you immediately. I had a lot of listeners that learned. This is the goal of a text line when you have one that's based on a team like the Sabres is Don Granato gets fired. People learning about the news via our text service. That's the goal of this thing when we started it. So glad to see that we were helpful in some way there. As the Sabres fire head coach Don Granato after 3.5 seasons as Buffalo Sabres head coach. We will talk about Granato a lot in the course of the coming days and on today's show. There is a steal the show moment here, though, from Kevyn Adams, because you know how these press conferences go for coaches and GMs for both the Bills and the Sabres and other sports. They're often not that interesting. It's often an executive or a coach trying to give you as little information as possible while getting through the press conference. But instead, what we got on this Tuesday afternoon, a show stealer away from Granato and looking back on Granato. We will still do that on today's show, but I'm putting that off to the end because Adams came with fire and fury in this presser on the state of the team, and he was awfully specific about what he is looking for in the next head coach. And he gave some pretty clear indications that Kevyn Adams has got a guy. He said he's got a guy. He didn't quite say it literally, but with his words, and if you read into it enough and you hear guys like Adams, you have GM types enough, he's got a guy. And he thinks he's going to get him. Whoever this guy is, Adams is very convinced this is the right person, and he thinks he's going to get him. So we'll get to all of that coming up on today's show. If you do not watch the show on our YouTube channel, just know that that option is always available to you. So we'll start with what Adams said. He came right out on the coach search. And the next head coach that the Sabres are going to have, he said, is going to be a veteran coach. It is going to be someone with NHL experience. Over and over and over, Adams talking about wanting a coach with experience. Can you hear it in my voice, by the way? Adams got me strangely fired up. I did not anticipate that at all after he talked today, but he definitely resonated with me in that department. Adams, some of the things that he said about the coach search. He said, quote, "My mind is crystal clear on what we're looking for, and we will move as quickly as possible to get it done." That's what Adams said when asked about the coach search. Does that make you think he's got a guy in mind? I heard that. That was really the first clear comment he made on the coach search, and my mind immediately went to, oh man, Rod Brind'Amour. Now, to be fair, everyone else on Twitter and our text line thought more about Lindy for that comment, which is also obviously very possible here. And I'll get to those two coming up in a little bit. Adams, what else did he say? He got asked about if he sees a number of candidates out there that fit, what he's looking for in a new head coach. He said, "I have a plan, and if the plan moves quickly, even better." Again, not really entertaining the thought of, oh no, we're going to have a long, lengthy coach search with a lot of different candidates. Actually, excuse me, that is not the answer to that question. That was an answer, obviously, I have a plan, and if the plan moves quickly, even better. That was when asked about how long it's going to take. And if the plan moves quickly, he has a plan. And when he says, I have a plan, I think he means one coach. He has one specific guy in mind. The thing he said about the numbers, so he got asked about if he sees a number of candidates out there that fit what he's looking for. He said, I have very specific thoughts on a number of coaching candidates, but I'm not compromising on what I think this team needs. I'm going to get the right guy. The first part of that answer is just kind of hogwash, right? Like, I have thoughts about a number of coaches. He doesn't tell you he thinks there's a lot of guys that fit the description. He kind of bypasses the question and just ends with, I'm going to get the right guy. I'm going to get the right guy. That's conviction from a GM that in his gut knows who his coach is about to be. And we'll see who that ends up being. But I loved hearing how definitive Adams was on that. And I'm someone that after the Granato news came out on Tuesday morning, was very much in the boat of let's skip the first-time coach ideas this go-round. Seth Appert, no thanks. I know that he's done a good job in Rochester, but he comes from a development background and a resume that looks awfully similar to Don Granato's. And Appert, to me, with never being a proven head coach before, just not the time for me for a guy like that. By the way, Adams got asked about Appert and basically all but eliminated him from the coach search. If you are paying attention, he said he's done a phenomenal job. He's got a bright future. I want him to be completely focused on Rochester right now. That's what Adams said about Seth Appert. Sorry, Seth, you are out of the running. In terms of, in my head, Appert is no longer in consideration to be this coach. And for how much he talked about veteran coaches, I'd eliminate Michael Pekka. Michael Pekka is a popular idea amongst fans. He's assistant coach for the New York Rangers. If you want to think about other former coaches, Jay McKee out there in the junior level, throw him out. Mark Savard, who's an up-and-coming assistant coach, former Bruins center for the Calgary Flames, throw him out the window. Adams is going for the proven coach with experience at the NHL level. So that's where we're at in terms of what he says. He got asked about Lindy specifically at the end of the press conference, and he walked off that podium with this phrase: as I walk out of here, no, I have a plan. And then he left. Baller. I mean, as baller as it gets for a 50-year-old hockey general manager, right? Like, he did a great job. I think for a fan base that is just starving for hope on any level at all, Adams, I think, kind of fired up the fans a little bit. At least the ones that were listening. And if you had not heard it, maybe you're listening to this podcast first and just looking for a recap of it, I would suggest carving out 30, 40 minutes and listening to it. I think it'll make you feel better about being a Sabre fan this summer. At the end of the day, I do understand it is just words, right? I understand it is just words. The action's got to come. If he thinks he's getting a guy, he's got to actually do it before he's going to get credit for it. But there was just, I don't know, a heightened motivation and urgency. That's really the word I'm looking for. There just felt like an urgency to Kevyn Adams when you listen to him that you just sometimes question whether that's ever there with this owner, GM, coach. Like, the word urgency, like, do you guys have an urgency to win? Because your actions often speak like you don't and that you're okay with where you are on some level. And Adams just definitely did not sound like that. He sounded pissed off that this season just happened the way it did. So what else did Adams say that I want to pass along now? I mean, we have a whole summer to dive through every little thing he said and, go through types of roster stuff that he mentioned. And of course, we'll do more on the coaching search in the coming days and weeks, depending on how long it takes. He had some comments about Tage Thompson. and Dylan Cousins. We'll save that for a future episode. But he had some good things to say and was willing to kind of go after Cousins a little bit on the season that he just had. Like Adams, quote, an experienced coach, someone I'm looking for. Sometimes you have to have that feel of when to push players. That's Lindy. That's Brind'Amour, right? He had called out the fans, or excuse me, he did not do that. He did make a comment about the players and the outside noise that I liked. Again, that's worth mentioning. We'll talk more about that in a future episode. He just had some good stuff. He got asked about expectations and his message to the players, and he said his response to that question was, "It's go time. It's time to perform, not just on an individual basis, but on a team level. The time is now." So good. Adams also defiantly wanted everyone to know. This is his another quote. Our system did not change. Need me to say it again? Our system did not change. Adams was great, and he didn't shy away from certain topics. But again, we'll focus today's show on the coaching comments that he made. I am convinced that he's got one person in mind, and I'm convinced it's one of two people. We'll talk Lindy and Rod Brind'Amour. Who is it? Who's the guy? Who is Adams' guy? Let's try to figure it out. Coming back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, we'll, of course, talk plenty about Don Granato as well. We are presented here on this show by FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, the hockey playoffs are approaching, but the NBA play-in tournament starts tonight. I can't wait for it, and I've got some of my own action riding on it that I can't wait for. Playoff time for basketball and for hockey, plus baseball's in full swing. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, thanks for making us your first listen every day. And because we've got only 9 days to go until the NFL draft, Locked On's put together a Locked On NFL mock draft live special, April 17th. That is tomorrow, Wednesday night at 7 p.m. It'll be streaming on Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Check it out on either platform, 7 o'clock tomorrow. 9 days to go until the draft. Get some takes on what the Bills might be looking for at wide receiver. So Adams, at his press conference on Tuesday, poignant. Every time he spoke about coach, he gave you more and more indications that one guy is who he has in mind. He's got a name. And the guy he was describing, I think, is one of two people. I think it's either Lindy Ruff or Rod Brind'Amour. I tweeted this out, and I still feel it. I only tweeted it out like 20 minutes ago as of recording. If I were setting the Sabres head coach odds this second, if they put me in charge, if FanDuel put me in charge, hey, can you set some Sabres head coach odds for us? I'd only list two names. Maybe I could get to a long shot other name. There are two names I'd mention. I don't believe that Adams would have as much conviction in one guy and one name that he's thinking about if he didn't have previous experience with that person. Craig Berube is a coach that's available that does fit a lot of the description that Adams talked about, knowing when to push players, the veteran, experienced NHL coach, right? Someone that is willing to get after players a little bit. He talked about that. Berube fits those, but you've not interviewed Berube. Feels like you wouldn't have as much conviction that you have the right guy in mind or that you have a plan until you talk to him. That's more of, if Berube is your favorite idea, you start talking about coaching searches, not I've got a plan, we're going to go get this guy. He has experience with both Lindy and Rod Brind'Amour. He, of course, was an assistant coach under Lindy Ruff for multiple seasons. He worked with him every day. He would know exactly the type of coach that Lindy Ruff is. On every level, he would know what Lindy is all about. And while he did not experience Rod Brind'Amour as a coach, he knows Rod Brind'Amour well. They played together on the 05-06 Hurricanes. And in fact, I mean, it's more than that. It was multiple years that they played together in Carolina. I should get the exact number of years for you. Adams was in Carolina from 2001 to 2007. So he was there for a good long while Rod Brind'Amour was there from 1999 to 2010. Well, Brind'Amour was there a lot longer than I thought he was. So from 01 to 07. So those two played together for like damn near 7 years. So he knows all about Rod Brind'Amour. Brind'Amour, of course, is still under contract with the Carolina Hurricanes. So my thought on figuring this out, because I'm eliminating everybody else for the moment. It's in my opinion, it's one of these two guys. Lindy, I would make as the favorite. In this odds that I just kind of magically created, if I was in charge, I put minus 200 for Lindy, plus 200 for Brind'Amour. And what that represents is just that Lindy is available and Brind'Amour is not. Brind'Amour might stay in Carolina. Unless Adams knows Brind'Amour. He would, if he knows him that well, which it appears he does, he probably would have a good feeling about whether he's staying or going. So Brind'Amour I just included because I think he fits everything here and Adams knows him well. Lindy, though, is available. So here's my way of thinking about this right now. If this coach search is going to be quick, if they're going to hire a coach within a week or 2 weeks, I think Lindy Ruff is going to be their head coach. I think Lindy Ruff will be their next head coach if that's the case. Every single day that passes, every day that passes, every week that passes, I think it gets more and more likely that Adams' guy is Brind'Amour and that he thinks he's going to get Brind'Amour. The reason I say that is there's no reason to wait on Lindy. If you want Lindy Ruff, if Adams was talking about Lindy Ruff in that press conference, it's done within 2 weeks. I think it's done within 2 weeks if that's his guy. If Brind'Amour is his guy, he's got to wait for the playoffs. He's got to wait for Carolina for season to wrap up. So that's why I say it. It becomes less and less believable as you get to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month. Once you start getting into timelines like that, I will more and more believe that Adams thinks he's getting Brind'Amour. If this is going to be a quick search, I bet it's Lindy. So my chips right now would be on Lindy, but don't discount the Rod Brind'Amour idea. I'm thinking a lot about it after today. I'd still make it an underdog, but I truly believe the next Sabres coach is going to be one of those two gentlemen. It's going to be Lindy Ruff or Rod Brind'Amour. Listen, I could be wrong. I was wrong about Granato. I've been telling you for weeks, if not months, that I just don't think they're going to fire him. And they did. They fired Don Granato. I was wrong about Diggs too lately. Maybe you just shouldn't trust me 100%. I mean, I think I get some of this stuff right. But you never know what they're going to do, right? You just, unless you're in that meeting room, you just never truly know what they're going to do. There's talk, there's inside stuff that sometimes it gets spoken like it's true, and then they change their plan. So whatever. I right now, my chips would lie with it's either Lindy or it's Rod Brind'Amour, just reading the tea leaves on Adam's comments. All right, when we come back, let's spend a segment on Don Granato, how we got here, and how he'll be remembered. I think he is very different than the previous Sabres drought coaches. I'll explain when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by Sleeper. So it's playoff time, and the Sabres are not in a spot for the 13th year in a row. Not good, but you can win big still by just, even though the Sabres can't, by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Check out different players around the league. You're going to have to start focusing on players that are reaching the playoffs like McDavid or McKinnon. You can't use Crosby anymore unless the Penguins squeak in here on the last day. Check it out. Whether those players will record more or less than their sleeper projections for goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, or more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. And you can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention, nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. It's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. A newsworthy day. The Sabres get rid of Don Granato. They relieve him of his duties. I should also mention, by the way, that the Sabres did not just make Don Granato a sacrificial lamb here, but they also relieved assistant coach Jason Christie, who was a Granato guy, and video coordinator Matt Smith of their duties. Matt Ellis survives. Yet again, Matt Ellis survives. Now, one thought I had about that is, are the Pagulas and Kevyn Adams going to want their next coach to retain Matt Ellis? And I think it's very possible. I just told you I think it's going to be Lindy or Brind'Amour. Very different situations. Maybe Ellis is a guy you can use to figure this out. If Rod Brind'Amour is going to become the next Sabres coach, I don't believe for a second that Matt Ellis is going to be retained on this staff, because Brind'Amour is going to want his own guys, and Brind'Amour's got a lot of power. Brind'Amour would have a market. He could have any job that's open in the league if he probably wants it. He'll get his guys. So that's Brind'Amour. Lindy, though, Lindy knows Matt Ellis well, right? Ellis played a bunch of seasons under Lindy Ruff, and Lindy always played him way more than he should have. So I could see Lindy wanting to retain Matt Ellis, which I think makes a little bit of sense. Mike Bales, the goalie coach, also among others that are retained on the staff. So 3 firings, including the Sabres head coach. And you know what? I don't take any joy in talking about Granato failing at the end here. I liked Don Granato a lot. Not even just the person, right? The dude was awesome. He was a great dude, right? He overcame a lot. Remember, he had, I want to get it right. He had that medical scare early in his Sabres tenure as assistant coach where he almost died. And he was in the hospital for days and weeks. And he made a recovery. He returned to the bench with Ralph Kruger as an assistant with the Buffalo Sabres. And then, of course, he stepped in with zero expectations. I remember where I was driving around when they fired Ralph Kruger during that losing streak. And I heard that Don Granato was going to be the interim coach. And it was like an afterthought. Like, okay, just a guy to get him through the season. I know nothing about him. He'll get us through the season, and that's about it. The next day, I heard him talk for the first time. And I was sold. Like, this guy sounds awesome. He knows exactly what he wants. I love the style he's talking about, scoring goals, speed and talent, and getting the most out of their best players. Loved how he sounded. And then on an individual basis, he did it. He did it. When I say he did some great things that he will be remembered for, trust me that I know that he didn't do great things when it comes to team success. The bar's got to be higher. You got to make the playoffs. You got to win in the playoffs too to be considered to do great things with the team. They never made the playoffs. In 274 games that he coached, they never made it. So I understand the team success was not there. But he did do some really good things player-wise. And if you think back to other failed coaches of the Sabres drought, how many of them do you remember a single good thing about? Any of them? Do we have any positive thoughts about Ralph Kruger or Dan Bylsma or Ted Nolan or Ron Rolston or Phil Housley? Right? None of them, really. Granato, though, what will you remember about Granato? You will remember some positives, unlike those other guys. You will remember, Granato came in and he completely saved Rasmus Dahlin. Dahlin was nowhere when Granato took over. He had no confidence. He was getting walked on a nightly basis. He was not producing a lot of points or offense. And then Granato took over, and Dahlin, boom, started to realize a lot of the potential that he had as a number 1 overall pick. We forget about Dahlin being nowhere, I think, because the number 1 guy we think about for a Granato success, of course, is Tage Thompson. He had the wherewithal to put him at center in the first place, despite the fact that he hadn't done it since collegiate hockey at UConn, even not at the end of UConn. It had to be earlier than that. He got Tage from, even now, like, Tage only scoring 29 goals this year. Everyone was disappointed with the season Tage just had, right? When Granato showed up, Thompson wasn't even a real NHL player. He wasn't a guy that deserved to be in the NHL. He was an AHL guy. And he went from that to top 6 center. And with one season of a 47-goal season, there's worthy belief that he is a legit number one center in the NHL. But even if he's only a top 6 guy that scores 30 plus goals a year, remember, he was not even a real NHL player when Granato showed up. And there are other examples too, right? He salvaged at least 3 years of Jeff Skinner's career. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is all downhill from here. But Skinner was nowhere, obviously, with Kruger being around when Granato showed up. He salvaged Jeff Skinner. He got career best out of a lot of other guys. I just think Granato did a really good job with a lot of individual talent. But both things can be true. That's where I'm at. Multiple things can be true. He did some great things while he was head coach of the Buffalo Sabres, and it was absolutely time to move on from him. It had to be time to move on from him. You're not a real NHL team if you are willing to come back for a 4th season with a head coach that has yet to make the playoffs. Nobody does that. Unless your name is Wayne Gretzky, because that happened in Arizona like 15 years ago. Why? The guy was Wayne Gretzky. Kind of hard to fire Wayne Gretzky. It rarely happens that a guy gets that much leeway without making the postseason. It had to happen. And they got to try something different. They got to try to do better. And I'm glad to see that the organization and Kevyn Adams, who said that this decision was his decision to make. Of course, he had conversations with Terry Pegula, but this was his decision to move on from Don Granato. I'm more and more impressed with Kevyn Adams here. I don't need to see him go. My big questions about Adams, at least one by one here, have slowly been answered. I had questions about him at the deadline. Do you have the stones to pull off a big trade where you're taking on risk? And he did. He traded the guy that had been his best center all season for a defenseman in Bo Byram. He was willing to do that. My next question was, do you have the power, one, and the foresight, the willingness to have a high bar to fire Don Granato? I didn't have confidence they would fire Don Granato, and I am impressed that they were willing to do that. And, Pegula being willing to fire a guy and sign off on it when the extension hadn't even started. Good on that front, too. I liked Granato a lot, but I am glad to see that they did this. And it makes me more excited for the future. Fans were not going to be invested at the start of next season if Don Granato returned as their head coach. And they would have been, one bad losing streak away from firing Granato anyway into next year. It just was not going to be a good situation. So good to see they did it. And we can have some fun now talking about coach ideas. I believe it's only going to be Lindy or Brind'Amour, but maybe we'll learn something in the coming days that make us think that there's something else on the table. If you've got an idea that's not Lindy or Rod Brind'Amour, let me know what you think. Or if you've got a preference between the two, or what's more likely and what you'd like to see, all that's on the table. It is coach search time for the Buffalo Sabres. First time in 5 years. In the first time in this show's history. This show began in October of 2019. The last real Sabres coach search was in the spring of 2019. All right, our first ever coach search. Let's have some fun with it as we enter the off season. I didn't even mention what the score was in the Sabres finale. You probably know by now. They won 4-2. Not big news anyway, because a lot of bigger things have happened since. Thanks for listening. We'll talk more about other comments that Adams made about the players, because Wednesday, Thursday is going to be player exit interviews, player locker room clean-out day. So we'll talk more about what Adams had to say and season overall talk on a lot of the players before we dive all the way back in on the coach search. Thanks for listening to Locked On Sabres podcast, making us your first listen every day. Now go check out Locked On Sports Today, talking plenty of NFL draft, NBA play-in, NHL playoffs, and more. Check it out on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Talk to you tomorrow here on Locked On Sabres.